Good evening and welcome. We are looking forward to a fantastic conversation this evening. We'll be getting started in just a few moments. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We are looking forward to a wonderful program. We'll get started shortly. All right, welcome all. We are very excited for tonight's program, so without further ado, I'm going to invite Kate Markert, Hillwood's Executive Director, to come on and introduce the show.
Thank you so much, Erin. Good evening, and thank you for inviting us into your homes this evening. I'm Kate Markert, Executive Director at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens in Washington, D.C. My pronouns are she and her. And as we begin, I would just like to take a moment to gratefully acknowledge the Nacotch tank, also documented as the Anacostan, the Piscataway, and the Pamunkey, the native peoples on whose ancestral lands Hillwood stands, as well as the diverse and vibrant native communities that make their homes near us today. With spring arriving in our gardens, you can see it right behind me. I invite everyone in the DC area to bask in the beauty of Hillwood this season. We are open Tuesday through Sunday, 10 to 5. Our new exhibition, The Luxury of Clay, Porcelain Past and Present, is on view in the Dacha through June 26th, right? Do not miss this moment of the exhibition and Spring in the Gardens. Tonight's conversation with artist Roberto Lugo is the first of 3 programs exploring the luxury of clay. I hope you'll join us either at Hillwood or from home on Wednesday, April 6th, as curator Rebecca Tillis discusses Marjorie Post's porcelain collection in the context of her female contemporaries, Consuelo Vanderbilt and Anna Thompson Dodge. We will conclude the series virtually on Thursday, April 21st, with a talk by ceramicist Chris Anteman, who will speak on her elaborate centerpieces. April will also include an opportunity to meet with members of Hillwood's environmental action team, which we call HEAT, to learn what's going on at Hillwood to ensure a vibrant, healthy, and sustainable future. That's on Earth Day, Friday, April 22nd. Then on Tuesday, April 26th, I'll be having a conversation with best-selling author Allison Pataki about her new book, The Magnificent Lives of Marjorie Post. I know no one here will be surprised when I say that the book is available in our museum shop. And if you're not already a Hillwood member, I encourage you to join today and take advantages of discounts in the shop, as well as on programs and at the cafe. I want to share a few practical reminders about how tonight's virtual lecture will work. Your cameras and microphones are off, so please make yourself comfortable. We still want to hear from you. Please say hello and tell us where you're viewing from using the chat. And finally, submit your questions using the Q&A module, which of course is separate from the chat, just as they cross your mind. We will get to as many questions as we can before the end of the program. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Roberto Lugo is a Philadelphia-based American artist, activist, spoken word poet, and educator of Puerto Rican descent. His work has been featured at institutions such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and can be found in the permanent collections of others like the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and of course, now at Hillwood. Known for his porcelain work, Roberto focuses on illuminating porcelain's historically aristocratic surface with imagery commenting on social and racial injustice. Roberto draws on traditional European and Asian porcelain forms among classic patterns and motifs, combining them with his own style inspired by urban aesthetics and culture. He often features portraits of people from the Black and Latino communities whose identities have historically been absent from luxury items like porcelain. Roberto has won numerous awards, a Pew Fellowship, the Cynthia Hazen Polsky and Leon Polsky Rome Prize, and a United States Artist Award, to name just a few. He currently teaches at the Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple University, Philadelphia. Joining us for tonight's conversation is the curator of this exhibition, Rebecca Tillis, Hillwood's own curator of 18th century French and Western European fine and decorative arts. Roberto and Rebecca, we are so excited to hear this conversation.
Thank you, Kate. And Roberto, thank you so much for being with us this evening. It is such a pleasure to see you. And I just want to say it has been an absolute honor working with you both directly and indirectly and bringing your work to Hillwood. So please, a warm welcome and thank you so much again for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
It's an absolute delight and pleasure. I've been looking forward to speaking with you for quite some time. There's so much to discuss, as you can imagine, and I know we have a limited amount of time with you. So I thought we could start with the image on the screen, which is the title banner for the current exhibition, The Luxury of Clay, Porcelain Past and Present. I am sure I'm not the only one to say when I look at your work, I immediately see a connection to the long line and tradition of antique ceramics, illustrated by the juxtaposition of your teapot, a Queen and I, which is on the right, with a 19th century example from Hillwood's collection on the left. Can you tell us how you came to work with ceramics and how your study and exploration of historic pieces influence your work? And you're on mute, just so you know. There you go. Okay, perfect.
Absolutely. So, you know, I love to tell this story because there's a lot of things about me that I guess are uncommon in terms of, you know, working in the field of ceramics and the decorative arts. I didn't start to work in art at all until I was 25, and you know, I just turned 40 last year. So I've been in art for a total of 15 years. And, you know, prior to that, I didn't have any art classes. You know, I did some graffiti growing up. You know, there's a lot of murals in Philadelphia through the mural arts program that were really influential to me in terms of having a sense of pride of my heritage. They also just served as a reminder that, you know, something that you could do within your life could be monumental. And so you know, around that time in my life, I was really lost in my mid-20s, and I was trying to figure out, like many are at that age, you know, what to do. And for me, there wasn't a real precedence of people, my family or people in the community that I grew up going to college, because I grew up in, you know, part of Philadelphia called Kensington, which is also known as the Badlands. And, you know, a community that really has a lot of, you know, drug abuse issues and sex work. And so growing up in that, it didn't really feel like I had a ton of options. I winded up taking a community college class because community college, I winded up moving to Florida to sort of get away and seek a new life for myself. The classes were only $300. So I decided to take a class. And I wanted to take an art class because, you know, it just felt more organic to me. It felt like a really good introduction. I was worried about, you know, feeling like an outcast growing up in, you know, where I did, and, you know, not knowing how to really sort of write a paper, properly cite it, or any of the things that you really need to prepare for college. And when I first came to the pottery wheel, it was one of those things where it felt really familiar, but also really foreign. And I think the familiarity comes from, the desire to be creative. And I think so many people are born with that, where there's so many people are born with different things, whether it's, sense of curiosity, love of reading the literature, love of history. And there are also some people who are really prone and driven towards, being creative with your hands and making things. And up to that point, I hadn't realized that I was one of those people. And so working in ceramics, one of the things that I found that is very common is, even though I had a lot of experiences up to that point, I hadn't really seen myself as someone who had, witnessed a lot of racism growing up. Even though I was physically assaulted for my race for going in the wrong neighborhood, people called me all sorts of derogatory terms growing up because my race is, ambiguous to many. And so when I went to art school, it was a really interesting moment because it was the first time I'd really been around a mostly white class, and people that grew up in vastly different situations, not just people who grew up wealthy. There was also, people who grew up in the same economic situation as I do, but were white. And, they did have different sort of priorities and different things that they were interested in. And so for me, being involved in the classroom, I really felt like I was experiencing, being in a place that I didn't belong. I kind of felt like I was in some weird, movie or time travel where I winded up in this pottery studio somewhere in the middle of Florida. And through that experience, my work started to develop into what you see today. And it was really a response of not only my lived experience, but my education and the arts. And, this realization through many instances where, regardless of what I made, I had this real interest in being a production potter and learning how to make sort of like really utilitarian objects. But realizing that no matter like what I did in that regard, people still saw me as a person of color. And that was really the forefront of everything whenever a conversation in my work would come up, so much that I grew to resent it. And one day I was walking in the library at school trying to do some research, looking at different forms, and I'm also somebody who, once I started to take art history classes, really fell in love with the history of the decorative arts, especially post arts and crafts movement. And I came upon this book of Worcester porcelain, and that to put me on this track of looking at Sèvres porcelain and other manufacturers that really were making work for royalty. And so one of the first things I did towards the work that I do right now is I put a portrait of myself on one of the pieces of pottery. And for me, it was partly therapeutic because it was kind of like me saying, look, I belong here, and not only as the maker, but the person who's, in the vignette. And that started me on this trajectory of the work that I make now, which is really looking at these histories and things that were made, at the time that I'm referencing a lot of this 19th century work. Porcelain was considered more expensive than gold. And so in order to, be able to commission something was really for the wealthiest people. And so to be able to look at the history of all the people that have come before me to give me the opportunities that I have, and to be able to, look back at these pots that I also revere and love, and to be able to, make them, but then also revisit who gets to be put on those and who gets to make it is really at the heart of what it is that I do.
You fed right into the next, exactly what I was going to ask you, which is, again, that the profile portrait of yourself that we see on the front of this Queen and I, obviously in the back is Mary Elizabeth Lang, but I was going to ask you, again, you've talked about the legacy and how, how your work recontextualizes and redefines who is depicted and memorialized in art and in history. And ceramics, will be around for thousands of years, even when they are excavated out of the ground in pieces and shards. They, these colors and these images will remain. So, how do you how do you choose, how do you make the difficult decision of whose portraits and stories are depicted on your, not just your teapots, but in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, going through school for ceramics, one of the things that was really at the forefront of a lot of our minds when we're making ceramic objects, and especially when you're making pottery, is how does it function? And usually when people think about function, they're thinking about utilitarian, how to eat and drink out of it. And for me, one of the things I was really struck with is growing up, I hadn't had any relationship with pottery, especially handmade pottery. And so, and I think also if I ever did use a handmade pot, I probably would have never noticed it, because I think for people that come from communities like that, mine, if you're afraid of where your food is going to come from, your food insecure, you're not worried what you're eating it out of. And so for me, I also think about how my work functions in terms of society, what it says and what it does, not necessarily just like how somebody uses it in an intimate sort of domestic space. And so a lot of times when I'm putting a portrait of someone on the work, and you'll be able to see it in some of the pieces that are at the Hillwood, what I'm really doing is I'm thinking about how to create an argument, or how to communicate an idea through the individuals. And it's not, I don't always put portraits on my pottery. That's a part of it. But it's specifically looking at this history of people commissioning people to be on pieces, and how often in museum collections and when people go to museums, they often only see a certain type of person on these works. And so to be able to look at this history, it feels like there's nothing in it for you. And so a lot of times when I, for you, as in terms of being a person of color, like I never went to the Philly Museum really until, I think maybe I went once on a college trip, but, when I actually had a piece in the museum was, probably one of the first times I'd ever actually been to the museum. And a part of that is like this feeling that you have that these things aren't for you, right? And it's not really true, because, as a person of color, I think like just because I'm brown on the outside doesn't mean that like I don't go to a museum and like look at Della Robbia and get really excited, and like look at a Da Vinci painting and just like fall in love, and, all the normal things that people of all different races, feel. And so one of the things that I'm really trying to contribute is this idea that, Black and brown people have made significant contributions to society, whether those are musicians, in politics, as abolitionists. And for me, I'm really trying to celebrate those in a very traditional way. So I kind of see myself as a traditional artist, and I'm doing something that's been done for generations, except for this generation has the autonomy to make some decisions and choices to kind of complicate the narrative. And that's not for me, that's not a replacement of what's happened before. You can't replace what's happened before, but it's a contribution for us to be able to see ourselves reflected in more spaces. So for me, it's the people knowing who I am, so that they understand that a maker can be a person of color and can be specifically from the type of neighborhood that I'm in. And then also be the people that get put on there. And one of the things that I really love about my work, speaking of this like generationally, is that my work can be appreciated without even knowing who the artist is. Like I think a lot of times people will probably see a piece, like, you might see the John Lewis piece in there and just remember that John Lewis was on a piece and not remember who the artist is. And for me, I'm very comfortable with that. So when I get an opportunity to commemorate these people on pieces that last thousands of years, I think it functions in the way that I'm really hoping.
Well, speaking of John Lewis, we fed right into the next object that I wanted to spend a little time talking about. And thank you so much for what you've just said about the Queen and I. I think it's incredibly relevant, and the piece in the show has really related. I'll just go back for a second. Has related to some wonderful early Meissen forms, and your reference to Greek pottery and Chinese, and then of course with your own self-portrait brings it to the 21st century. This continuation is really It embodies so many of important messages that I hope this exhibition will continue to try to represent. So back to John Lewis, I wanted to spend a little bit time talking about these two vases that are in the mansion. One of them is behind me in my backdrop. They're very different in shape and subject matter, but I thought we could start with the vase, obviously on the left, that you just mentioned with John Lewis, since of course you know it's a very special piece for Hillwood and was recently acquired for the permanent collection, which we are absolutely thrilled to have. As you know, of course, it's called Good Trouble and features the late civil rights leader and Georgia Congressman John Lewis on the front. And just to remind those that haven't had a chance to see the exhibition in person, 3 contemporary women politicians on the reverse, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, former Georgia State Representative Stacey Abrams, and Vice President Kamala Harris. So just going back to the front one more time, we see the word good at the top and part of the word trouble. Took me a while to try to find the word trouble below, but I found it. And I wanted to ask you about the title of this piece. I'm sure you know, but in case you know others might not be aware, there was an opening ceremony in 2019 for the exhibition Rosa Parks in Her Own Words, held at the Library of Congress, where John Lewis said, quote, "Rosa Parks inspired us to get in trouble, and I've been getting in trouble ever since. She inspired us to find a way to get in the way, to get in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble." So could you tell us a little bit about the meaning of this important phrase, good trouble, and how or if the impact of this particular quote by John Lewis inspired the title of this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the beautiful things that I figured out with art that's so true about writing as well is, sometimes the best pieces are really simple. They're complicated. They're built off of a bunch of complicated histories or narratives or visual elements. But at the end of the day, the way they're executed are really simple. And for me, what that means is that it can be understood by a broad audience, which is like really important. And so, one of the things, like, for example, with Good Trouble, thinking about John Lewis, towards the end of his life, this is a really celebrated figure, right? But really during the civil rights and throughout his career, a lot of the things that he was saying and doing, even though he's such a gracious, sweet person, and really wanting to work on both sides of the aisle and really wanting to connect with people who grew up and have different views than him. He was a controversial figure in that, it's like American politics is so polarized and you're either like one side or the other. And in the end of his life, it started to get to this point where, regardless of what side, I mean, most people can agree that his contributions were really vast, and that his life's work was so important. And that at the end, it really didn't matter if you were Republican or Democrat, like everybody felt that, and I feel like that's true for so many people today. There's a piece that I made before with Colin Kaepernick on one side and on one side, and I forget the name of the gentleman on the other side, but we're talking about somebody who was an abolitionist, and during the civil the Civil War, and how he was hung for his beliefs, and he was a white man, and at the time he was a controversial figure, but today, I hope most people agree that slavery was one of the most horrible things to ever happen in human history. And so today he's not a controversial figure, And so with Colin Kaepernick, one of the things that I've witnessed, even in a short period of time, when I first made the piece, it was controversial. But then after a while, it wasn't controversial anymore because, you know, when we started to have all of the protests happening with Black Lives Matter, you know, all of a sudden the NFL, who was giving him such a hard time, all of a sudden became fans of Black Lives Matter. And so did the NBA. And, you know, people started to understand where his protests and his sort of frustration with the legal system came from. And so even in that brief period of time, we start to see that person be seen in a different light. And for me, I see, you know, these women on the other side, Stacey Abrams, you know, AOC and Kamala Harris, in a very similar, thank you, John Brown, in a very similar light in how, you know, really what they're advocating for is people who normally don't have a voice, and people whose voices aren't heard. And that's exactly what it is that I'm trying to do as an artist. And this is a very rare piece in terms of having political figures. I normally don't, I don't want my work to be polarizing. You know, like what I really want my work to do is confront people with, you know, all the contributions that Black and Brown people have done. One of the questions that I think comes to mind, though, specifically, is me being a Puerto Rican person, and that a lot of my work has African American, you know, figures. And, you know, just to clarify it for everybody, I see myself as an Afro Latino. A lot of my ancestry is African, and, you know, growing up where I did, I grew up mostly around Black and Brown people, and not that I should have to defend myself, but, you know, looking at what it is that I do, these are the places where my influence comes from. So I can't hide away from that, you know, and you can see the way that people craft things together. Like when I think of the reason why I put Questlove and Nina Simone together is because, you know, around the same time that I was doing this, when you're asking about how do I choose people, you know, the Summer of Soul came out, you know, which is a film that Questlove put together. And, you know, I was thinking about, you know, about that particular contribution and how, you know, for most part, people might think of him as a drummer for the Roots, right? But look at like, if you give that person this opportunity, how that creativity translates over to a film and how incredible that film was. And then also I thought to include somebody who is, you know, also such a big influence in terms of, you know, very similar sort of creative output. And so that's why I put these two people together. If you look at the form, it does have graffiti. It also has patterns from Chinese pottery. And one of the things that's really interesting is a lot of times when you take elements, like when I look at these flowers, these are flowers that I learned how to make at a residency when I was in Hungary, and I got to visit the hair and porcelain factory. So those are Hungarian, you know, flowers, you know, in this relationship with graffiti from where I'm from and Chinese patterns, along with these, you know, African American people who are the people who are at the center of the piece. And for me, one of the things that I'm really trying to communicate with people is how beautiful I think diversity is, you know, because I think that one of the ways that we have not quite yet realized in terms of aesthetics and art is these combinations of things. I don't call it juxtapositions because I think like these aren't necessarily opposing forces or opposites. I think they're more of things that like come from different places and you don't imagine being together. And I'm an eclectic person. And so when I would make art, of course, my eclecticism would come out in this way.
No, it's wonderful to hear you talk about it. I've often referred to some of these different motifs and influences as sort of layering almost. And I agree. I don't love the word juxtaposition either in these references, but I think it's just I'm so fascinated by the flowers from Herond. I actually wasn't aware of that, and I was going to ask you about this because we do get a lot of questions about, you know, the different materials, the different references, the colors, the patterns, the motifs, specifically of the Questlove. I'll go back one more time to the front. And I was going to ask you another question about the graffiti, which you've touched on already a little bit. You've often referred to yourself as the ghetto potter, and you've talked a lot about your background as a graffiti artist. Can you just tell us a little bit more about how that title came about and why the incorporation of street art is so significant for you? I think you've touched on this a little bit already, but we can see it so clearly in these two pieces.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have the autonomy to use that word because that's where I'm from. Like I didn't choose to grow up where I did and see the things that I did and, live through the traumas that I now have to deal with as an adult from living in a place that has a lot of crime and violence. And for me, one of the things that I think is important is for us as people to be able to own words and redefine them in ways that actually make sense to us. So for me, the word ghetto, it means resourceful. I think of people who do a lot with very little, people who are really creative, like a lot of like influences in terms of fashion and music derive from places like where it is that I grew up, whether it's, Philly or Brooklyn, or the Bronx, Chicago, like, so many places that have these, similar humble beginnings where people learn how to be creative from having to live with less. And so for me, I wear it as a badge of honor. Graffiti is a great example of that. So, graffiti really is similar to hip hop in that I think, if people don't have art classes, and they're creative, what do? Like you don't give them any outlet for that, but they're also inherently creative. And I think a lot of times when people paint graffiti, they're not painting over, somebody's house. They're usually doing it in places where people don't care about. And then a lot of times when I notice when people do graffiti on people's houses or do it in places, they're usually not from that neighborhood. They're usually like, kids from the suburbs that want to come in and be cool and do graffiti. And so there's a very specific relationship. And one of the reasons why I also use graffiti is because I'm not a technician in terms of my graffiti, meaning that like, it's not this like sophisticated form that it is today. It was really about the act of putting my name on a wall, and that dates back to ancient Greece. When you think about it, like the term sgraffito and ceramic, which we use to mean to scratch through, which is how they made a lot of Greek pots, was because that's how they would write messages to one another on the walls in ancient Greece. And so the other thing too is I think there's a lot of like additional meaning when you look graffiti. Like when you were mentioning earlier not being able to see the word trouble, that's very intentional because you see John Lewis, you see the word good, it relates to it. It gives you something else to look at. Most people spend 3 seconds with a work of art, if that. But also in graffiti, one of the things that's very common is that you paint something and then it'll get covered over, either by a cover up, which is white, or someone else painting directly over that. And so, it makes that art ephemeral. And for me, one of the things that I find is really important about ceramics is that it lasts thousands of years. So I find a great irony in taking something that's ephemeral, that is not meant to last very long, and putting it on an archival material.
And speaking of archival materials, I mean, you really work with a variety of different ceramic materials. Metallic lusters and glazes, including stoneware and porcelain. I don't want to get too technical, but can you speak to how you select one over the other? Is it an intentional decision when you go into designing a piece and making a piece? Does it evolve or change? Do you have a vision, especially with Questlove, looking at you have the unglazed, the really raw clay juxtaposed with really, really metallic surfaces, and of course, as you mentioned, the Chinese references and the graffiti, and that it's so fascinating, this mashup of materials. And I was just wondering how you go about selecting which materials you work with.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I started with porcelain was because of its historic connotations. Like it's one of those materials where you can do one thing and have it mean multiple things. And so looking at the history of how porcelain was used, there's so much context that when you use it, it can present and make an argument for you. But porcelain is also really difficult to work with. It's almost a different material than clay in that it wants to crack a lot. It wants to have issues in terms of the process. And so it took a long time to really, begin to master that material. And then one of the things that I kind of fell in love with using brown clay is, you can use brown clay and you can make parts of it white to still represent that porcelain, but you can also have the raw clay, which turns into sometimes it's like dark brown that gets almost to the point where it's black, which like honestly I haven't used quite often to make figures with. Usually it's just because I love the way that the brown clay kind of seeps through the white glaze and you can still see it. It reminds me of the way like that blood is underneath your skin and you can still see how rosy your cheeks are, or I think it references the human body in a really metaphoric way.
I'm going to jump to another couple of objects, different objects. I thought we could spend a few moments on. These two gun teapots, for those of you that have not been able to see the exhibition in person yet, are currently displayed in the French porcelain room, and they're juxtaposed with 18th century Sèvres porcelain tureens, plates, teacups, and saucers from Hillwood's collection. And Roberto, of course, as you've astutely noted, that teapots and the idea of tea time conjures associations for white audiences that may not be the same for people of color. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach teapots, which have such a long history in ceramics, as you've talked about before?
Yeah, well, I think it's funny because I really love teapots today. Like it's probably my favorite form to make, but I also realize that one of the things that's really difficult about my work is that I don't just make a form and stick to that form to learn how to make it for the rest of my life. I'm constantly trying to reference things that have been made before historically. And when you do that, you're never going to make an object as beautiful as the original, or is sort of accomplished as the original. So for me, tea started very early when I started working in clay, because I noticed how often people were making teacups, teapots, and I had not had that experience. And so one of the things that I thought of with tea was like the ability to like sit down, because it's not that necessary of a functional object. Like you can kind of just put a tea bag in a cup and put hot water in it and you're good. It's about slowing down and two people sitting down. It's about conversation. And so I really love that as almost a framework to be able to tell a story or to be able to think about two people sitting down. And so usually there's two sides of the teapot, and it's sort of like kind of imagining what a conversation between these two people would look like. So this particular series, the actual spouts of these pots are actual real guns that were decommissioned. They were purchased back from a gun buyback program where people had guns, and in order to reduce violence, they start to sell these guns, and they get to an organization that then decommissions them and breaks them up into parts that you can't no longer use for their function. But I was thinking about the peaceful protests of Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and how what they were able to do in their lifetime was like, for example, with Martin Luther King, and I think very similarly with Gandhi, he brought to people, especially with television, made them aware of the violence that gets put onto Black people, through Selma, and so that's a really peaceful form of protest. And so it reminds me of the function of this decommissioned spout, which is to like still function in the same way and produce this result, but like also it's taking something that's violent and turning it into something that's useful. And so that's one of the reasons why I make these pots. And it's hard, right? Because one of the things is like the teapot and these decorative pieces can somehow be an escape. And not that I want everything to be this kind of like confrontation with people, but I think what it reminds me of is how I wish more people saw a lot of the issues that I'm working with, which is like to be aware of them. You don't always have the solution or don't have to have the solution, and it's not about you dropping everything that you're doing to make this better. But I think like when we have just a simple awareness, it makes the world so much of a better place because we're less likely to do things to oppress people or hold them back just because of the fact that we're aware that these things exist. And so by having these gun barrels, it's like you have this moment where you get to enjoy this teapot, but it's also like still partly aware of what's happening in the world. And it gives us an example of people who were able to accomplish so much without being violent.
And one thing that I think is so powerful in the way that they're displayed in the French porcelain room with portraits, of other, wealthy figures like Benjamin Franklin on some Sèvres cups and saucers, and the way they respond. I mean, they're classical in form, and they're they sort of harmonize. But then, of course, you see the not only with the gun barrels, but the different referencing of different textiles and Chinese references, which of course I think Sèvres and Mies and all of these factories were also doing, in their own right in the 18th century. It's such an interesting. The combinations of these is, the metallics and the colors and the also I think are the references, just like we looked at a little bit with the Queen and I, are such interesting layering of historic references, in addition to, like you said, some very current, relevant topics that I think draw a lot of images, to our minds as we live in a very difficult moment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I know time is short, and I want to leave a few moments for questions, but I thought we could just talk a little bit about what you're working on now, and for those that would like to see more of your work, where we can see your work next. I've put just a few of, I'm sure, of many things that you're currently working on, just for a few dates and things that are ongoing and upcoming. But I wondered if you could just tell us what we can look forward to, where we might be able to see your work soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are 3 big projects that I'm working on in addition to the incredible show at the Hillwood, which is I'm part of an Afrofuturistic period room at the Met. And you can see some more of my artwork there. This room is really such a blessing to be a part of because, it took a ton of research to put this together. And, the other artists that are involved in this exhibition are just phenomenal. And at the center of this room is imagining what, a space would look like in Seneca Village, which was, a middle-class community in the center of New York, not too far away from where the Met is, that was dismantled and taken away from the people that lived there. It was one of the first Black middle-class communities. It was the first Black middle-class community in the United States. And so it's this imaginative apartment space where you get to see all of this incredible furniture and decorative arts and visual art. And I definitely recommend you check that out. I have an exhibition at the Hermitage Museum. If you haven't been to the Hermitage, it's a really great place. It is a former home, and the space in the upstairs is really like open for you to be creative. And they gave me a lot of creative license, and so I turned it into a domestic space that'll have a dominoes room, a little library, and I'm exhibiting, they allowed me to exhibit a lot of my paintings. So I'm really excited for people to see those. So that piece opens in June, so be sure to check that out. And then right now, I'm currently doing an artist residency at the Grounds for Sculpture, New Jersey. And part of that, I'm doing a pot that's 20 foot tall that people will be able to walk into. I'm making that with the Seward Johnson Atelier next door, and I'm currently in the process of painting it. And so that'll be a great place to get away for a day if you have the time, because Grounds for Sculpture is a really great place to walk around as well. Yeah, so those are just some of the projects I'm working on. And I'd love to open it up to see if any of the audience has some questions and maybe answer some burning questions that people have.
Absolutely, and I'm sure there are. And before I turn it over to Erin, I just want to, Roberto, thank you so much again, for joining us this evening. I just also wanted to mention to the audience members that have not had a chance to see the exhibition yet in person that there are some additional pieces by Roberto Lugo at Hillwood on display that we just didn't have time to feature in tonight's program. And I hope all of you will have an opportunity to see them in person before the show closes on June 26th. So I'll turn it back over to Erin, but Roberto, thank you so much again for being with us this evening.
Of course.
Well, thank you both, Roberto and Rebecca. This has been great, and we do indeed have a lot of questions coming in from the audience already. We will try to get to as many as we can. So if you have a question burning in your mind, please, please, please keep them coming. And Roberto, I think a great place to start is actually where you just finished. Jeff Hirsch says, hi from Cheltenham, Pennsylvania, and wanted to know more about that monumental piece that we saw on Instagram this morning. I think that's what you just referenced for Grounds for Sculpture. Is there anything else you'd like to share about that piece as it is a work in progress?
Yeah, the piece for the opening, which I believe it opens, stay tuned, but I believe it opens May 21st. The interior of this piece, it has stairs to climb inside of it. And kind of the idea is for people to be in the vignette. So, rather than me painting a vignette, for people to be able to walk in and take a picture of themselves inside of one of my pots. So making something big enough for that. And for the opening, it's outfitted with electricity. So it'll be a DJ in there, spinning some records. And so it'll be a live sort of special moment if you have the time to attend that. That
sounds absolutely amazing. Let's see, we've got lots of great questions coming in. Amy Meadows asked about, particularly inspired by the Rosa Parks teapot that we looked at a little bit earlier, whether you use any decals or whether all of your portraits are painted by you, how that mix of options may work.
Yeah, so yes, I do use decals. And for those of you who are not familiar with the ceramic process, a decal is an image that you create beforehand that you print out with a material that has ceramic material. So you can't just use a regular printer. You have to use something that has ceramic glazes in it. And so usually I'll take my drawings from a sketchbook or that I do on my iPad and then transfer those over digitally so that I can apply it. And it really helps because it's difficult to get a symmetrical portrait. To hand draw it. And so if you've ever seen some of my older work has pieces where I hand drew the portrait on, and some of the, I still think they're nice, but some of the proportions are a lot different than how I would draw them in my sketchbook. And so that's why I use that process.
I love that. And I am busy moving from a message sent straight to me, and I am going to share that with everybody. Eric Dietrich from the Walters Art Museum mentioned an exhibition you did there quite some time ago where you were throwing on the wheel while a DJ was spinning. Can you talk a little bit about the ways that music and pottery come together in your practice as well as in your in your work itself? I know we talked a little about Questlove already.
Yeah, well, I think like music is like alive. And one of the things that I've kind of always been jealous of with ceramics is a lot of times when you display an object, it can feel like finished, and in many ways, I hate to say it this way, but like dead, because there's nothing coming addition. So I've always thought about how do I activate these pieces and how do I make them where people feel like they're living with them. I mean, one of the ways is to use them. But with the DJ, I just thought it's so interesting because with my experiences, I always see relationships. Like I see the relationship to throwing on a pottery wheel to that of somebody, spinning records as a DJ. And so I love to bring that to the audiences a lot of times for several reasons, because pottery might be foreign to them, but seeing a DJ isn't. And then second, because it kind of creates this active, space for my work to exist.
I love that. I love that. We just got a question from one of Hillwood's docents, Ilsa Higgins, who starts off by saying that your ceramic artwork is absolutely stunningly original. The visual, interpretive, related to contemporary history. She wonders if you have any specific advice for Hillwood docents who have this short opportunity to introduce visitors to your work during our guided tours. And she would love to know how you'd like to be introduced to our visitors in that space, beyond just the visual.
Well, I think one of the things that's really exciting, I mean, I think selfies kind of have a bad name for them because, we see so many people at art fairs taking pictures of themselves in front of artworks. But for me, that is for people to see themselves reflected in the art is so crucial. And so, I don't want them to see what it is that I created and just have it stop there. It might be really cool for them to think about who they would put on a pot. I think that's a really good question. And kind of break down the work in that way because, I think everybody's answer is so different. And then asking them why, I think gets really excited. I think any opportunity where you ask people for their opinion and, I think it gets them really excited and it makes them think about it afterwards. And I think it's more, has a lot more lasting effect, which is really the intent of the work.
I love that. Terry mentioned that they saw a very moving presentation you gave at an NCECA conference several years ago, and says first and foremost how much they are thrilled to see your work getting the attention that it deserves. They also wanted to know how you think the ceramics community can become more inclusive and open to diverse viewpoints, and wonder whether you've seen any progress to that end.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I've seen, progress. And I think acknowledging it is, when you see those things is very important, because I think one of the things that people unfortunately think today is like when you see something that you don't like, if you protest it, it'll go away, and the things that I'm benefiting from are things that people protested in the 60s, and so all the things that we're working is great as they are. We might not see the effects of even in our lifetime. Hopefully it doesn't take that long. But in the short time that I've been involved in ceramics, I definitely have seen a lot more care and thought put into trying to have a lot of different voices in the mix. And so I definitely seen a lot of progress. I think that the ceramics community, it definitely has some challenges, but because it's a field that I'm involved in and I get to see it, I do see a lot of people really trying. And for me, that speaks volumes because, when we're talking about race, that's just one of the problems that exist, there's also, a history of sexism, not only a history of racism, a history of, only people who grew up with certain means being able to have access to be makers. And I think today a lot of people who grew up in different experiences than that of a traditional, what we've seen so often, those people are professors like me who get to help foster new students and create a whole different experience for them.
I love that. And I love too that you are so dedicated as a teacher and to helping bring that next generation of artists to the fore. And all of that kind of speaks to me, kind of echoes what you said earlier with the incredible power that a simple awareness can start to bring. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Nina shared that they greatly appreciate the social justice component of your artwork and wondered if you have any plans to incorporate Puerto Rican art in future projects in light of the current wave of gentrification in Puerto Rico with crypto millionaires, and if that's something you feel connected to and how that might be something we can keep our eyes out for in the future.
Yeah, I'm actually right now trying to make I started a project called Boricua Barrio Barro years ago. This was before Hurricane Maria, where I really wanted to create a pottery studio in Puerto Rico to help develop, because the land has such rich clay in it. And I'd love to see more people working with that clay and more opportunities for people working in clay that are Puerto Rican and live in Puerto Rico. And right now I'm pushing for, to potentially have an exhibition in Puerto Rico that has similar contributions. Like what I'm doing for Grounds for Sculpture is really great because I'm also helping them develop their own pottery studio so people in the community can come in and make pottery on site. And so I'm really hoping to work with a museum or a place in Puerto Rico where, I can do something to a similar effect. I also really want to work with the clay from Puerto Rico. Be on the lookout for that because it's something that I'm very driven to do. And so I imagine that it'll happen within the next few years.
Excellent. Switching gears a little bit, and this may be a question that I'd love to hear you both speak towards. We did get a question about how Roberto's pieces are displayed in the mansion and the process of deciding what piece went where in order to communicate with the surroundings and in Rebecca's background, we see Roberto's pieces flanked by two pieces from our ceramics collection.
Yeah, well, the only thing I can contribute to that, I'd love to hear, Rebecca talk about it, but the only thing that I would say I can contribute to that is I really love seeing how it's set up because it helps to put a lot of my artwork into context in a way that I have not been able to do before. Being able to see it represented in the right historical sort of time frame with things that would have been displayed with it in such a beautiful space, it really helps to communicate the work in a way that I've never had the opportunity to do. So I'm very thankful about that.
Well, we've talked a little bit about this before the program, and I had this vision very early on that I really, as Roberto just said, I wanted these pieces to talk to each other. I wanted the integration of his work, with our 18th century furniture and portraits. His pieces are on sort of the northwest, the main axes. When you come into the house, you come in, you're confronted with three monumental pieces on our integrated in the 18th century furniture niches, and then to the left integrated into the French porcelain room, and to the right in the French drawing room. That was always the vision. What allowed this vision to happen was actually the exhibition was delayed a year, which really We always were planning to show The Queen and I in the exhibition, and I was fortunate enough to find an 18th century, a very early Meissen prototype that I think speaks very well to some of the, the inspiration that potentially Roberto was looking at in terms of a historic example and glazes, and that is a loan from the Smithsonian. So that juxtaposition was always conceived in the dacha, and what allowed us to pursue this, to integrate more of his work in the mansion, was really having a little bit more time to be able to find these wonderful loans and to work with Roberto and to make an acquisition, and to integrate them into more rooms of the mansion. And I was saying to him earlier that I knew it would be wonderful, but it was only when we put some of these vases that you could see in back of me on the commodes and saw them in front of these 18th century portraits when the whole thing just really came together. The influences, the metallic glazes that pick up some of the embroidery of the paintings, the marquetry of the furniture. It just, and of course the teapots in the French porcelain room, I think it just, the integration was just, it was meant to be.
It is absolutely so. I keep wanting to use the phrase, the energy is infectious. And I know that's not necessarily what we want to be thinking about over the last 2 years, but it just is. It is so energizing to see the pieces and to see just from, personally the staff response to how excited it was. We knew these were coming. We knew we had wonderful photographs of them, but seeing them in situ is just fantastic. So I hope that those of you who are in the DC area, if you haven't come to see the show yet, please do. We have 2 last questions that are one of which is a little more practical. And Stephanie Partridge sent this in. I hope that she is still here hanging in, because she submitted this question before Kate had even finished your introduction. How can we acquire your pieces? Where can we look to buy some?
So there's a couple of things. Right now, I'm in the process of developing a relationship with a gallery in New York. I can't make that announcement yet, but if you follow me on Instagram, I'm going to be announcing that on there. But generally, every month or every other month, I have a pottery sale on my website, which is villagepotter215.com. I'm going to post that here. What's really great about that is, I try to really make a certain batch of work that is accessible for people. It's not cheap, but at the same time, it's like I make cups and bowls. Last month I made some butter dishes. And so really
I love the butter dishes.
Yeah, next month we're doing some coffee pour overs that are in the shape of water towers. So I'm really excited to bring those out.
For those more accessible pieces, is your hope that they are put in a treasured spot on a display cabinet at home, or is your hope that they are used daily or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I think I really love to leave that up to the person who owns it, because sometimes people feel like the way to really treasure it is to use it, and sometimes people are afraid of doing it and they want it to display it. They're very proud of it and want to display it in a certain place in their house. And so I love to just leave that up to them.
I love that. We also got one more question that is a very practical question when it comes for ceramic art. Can you talk about how often things break?
Yeah, things break a lot, and it doesn't really matter how long you've worked in clay. It's just sort of part of the process. And I'm not very precious. Like, one of the things you learn about yourself with making art is some of the tendencies you have, like whether or not you're impatient, and what you're patient with, So I do tend to lose a lot of things, but I honestly find, it's sort of kind of a platitude as this might sound. I learn so much when things do break, it's definitely become less and less and less throughout the years. because, you know, each time something breaks, I'm like, oh, that's because I did this, or oh, that's because I did that. And so it does keep things interesting. So it's bad because it breaks, but it's also good because, you know, you never take anything for granted.
I love that. We got one last question that I think is a great place to end tonight. Carol mentioned how wonderful your inspiration and the marvelous murals throughout Philadelphia are connected. And she'd love to know a little bit more about how your work has been received in the neighborhood where you grew up, and whether you've been able to see that community start exploring their own creativity.
Yeah, so, you know, one of the things that's interesting is I lived in Philadelphia most of my life, and I've been here the last maybe 5 years because when I got this job at Tyler, which is part of Temple University, but the two worlds hadn't really collided because, you know, there wasn't a lot of relationship with art growing up, and so a lot of the friends that I have don't really understand what it is that I do, but are also really proud of me because it seems like I'm doing a good job at it. And you know, I would say that probably the best gauge is my family, who, again, there weren't any artists in our family, certainly no one doing it professionally, and so especially how personal the work was difficult at the beginning to understand. But now they're such a big part of it. Like my father and sister actually make boxes, wooden boxes, for when I sell my cups. They come with a little wooden box, and you know they're now participants in it, and they're makers themselves. And so I definitely think that there is some truth to, you know, when you learn these skill sets and you bring them back to your community, you can really help to foster that creativity. And so I'm doing it in a bunch of different ways. One of them is I go back sometimes and throw pottery on the street, just on the side of the road, and teach people who want to learn. And you know, that's really about getting rid of all the obstacles that you have to being able to, you know, make pottery.
I love that. And if you haven't seen any of those photographs, there are some incredible photos of you with your wheel set up in parks and bringing pottery to the people. So
Yeah.
thank you for just a truly delightful evening. I want to thank our audience for joining us tonight and for their excellent questions. And Roberto, I can't wait until the next time we're able to have our paths cross again, because it has been just a delight to have your work at Hillwood and to spend this time with you. Rebecca, congratulations on an incredible exhibition, and thank you for helping bring this story to us.
Roberto, thank you so much again. This has been such a highlight to speak to you and to show your work at Hillwood. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Aaron. I had a blast talking to y'all, and I hope everybody gets a chance to check out the exhibition.
Excellent. Have a great night.
All right, you too.
Please come.